You know, we talk a lot, as we should, about public transportation in Richmond and the issues we have. We talk about pollution and how rapid transit can solve that. We talk about traffic jams and how we can get people off the roads. And of course, we talk about the fact that the community does not always collaborate well, that the city and the counties don't always see eye to eye on the issue of buses. But there's one group that we don't always hear from, and that's bus drivers, the people who are at the heart of this transportation issue. And this summer, I was fortunate enough to be able to sit down and talk with 16 of these bus drivers as part of the collaborative exhibition, Driving Richmond, which I did with sound artist Benjamin Thorpe and photographer Michael Leese, who created these wonderful portraits that you're going to see. And I thought I would learn something about transportation and their views on it, but what I didn't expect is how much I would learn from them about how to love your work, how to create community, and how to overcome the obstacles that we all face in our lives. So I want to share some of these stories with you. The first surprise I had was that these bus drivers love their jobs. They really love them. And many of them have had lifetime dreams of being bus drivers. This is Leslie Zink behind you, and when she was little, she had a Tallheimer's bike that her grandfather gave her, and she used to ride around on that bike, picking up imaginary passengers, practicing to be a bus driver. Bruce Karusik took his first bus photograph when he was 5 years old, and he's been taking them ever since. He's got an amazing collection of thousands of images and artifacts from Richmond buses. But of course, these drivers don't just love the buses, they love their passengers, and that comes through loud and clear. This is Carl Brown, and he told me that his favorite part of his job is the opportunity that he has when he drops off a disabled passenger to stop his bus, get out, and walk across the street with that passenger to make sure that he or she is safe. This is Eldridge Coles, and he told me that when he started off driving buses, if he had regular passengers that wouldn't show up, he would actually drive his bus by their house to make sure that they were okay and that everything was fine, and I loved that. Marcia Schmiegelow used to drive the Richmond-Petersburg Express route, and she developed such a bond with her passengers that not only were they giving her presents on her birthday and Christmas and every other day in between, but when she ran for a job in the union, one of her passengers actually became her campaign manager and volunteered to create a very successful campaign. And that's right, these drivers are unionized, and they have been since 1888, which is very, very unusual in this right-to-work state. Now, sometimes this love of passengers goes beyond presents and relationships and escalates into something altogether different. Several of the drivers that I talked to had met their wives when they were passengers on their buses. And this is one of them. This is Dave Edmonds, and he had a passenger who used to ride his bus. They were both married at the time, and she used to ride his bus with her young son. And after Dave's wife died, and after this passenger's husband left her, they ended up getting married. And he told me, he said, you know, some people say black and white won't work together, but she's black and I love her. And, you know, several of these drivers had had the same experience on their vehicles. Now, of course, these bus drivers have had to go through a lot to get to where they are now. As you might imagine, all the way up through the 1960s, the GRTC was pretty segregated. If you look at a photograph of the class of 1965, it's all white men with the exception of one white woman and I think one African-American man. And this is Marshall Avent, who was one of the first black drivers in the 1970s. And he told me that when the GRTC first began having African-American drivers, white people would call the police to report that a black man had stolen a bus. That's Richmond. Jenny Bullock was one of the first women to drive a bus. Jenny was in her early 30s. She had 5 young sons when her husband left her. She had never driven a bus before, and she became one of the first female drivers. And this was back in the days when not only did the buses have no power steering, but they also had no radios or any other way to communicate. So if you ran into trouble, as sometimes happened, you would have to stop your bus and go ring someone's doorbell and see if they would let you use their phone. And Jenny was doing all-night routes at that time, alone in neighborhoods that sometimes weren't so safe. But she stuck to it, and she stayed with the GRTC all the way up until her retirement. And she said it's been a great experience. Now, sometimes bus drivers had experience from their previous lives that really helped them when they got into tough situations. And this was in George Barrett, who fought in the Vietnam War. And when he got back to Richmond in the early 70s, he got a job as a bus driver. One night, he was driving through Oregon Hill, and he got out to take a restroom break, and he found himself surrounded by an angry mob. And he had to find the weakest part in the mob, break through, get back onto his bus. By this time, the bus was being surrounded by this mob. They were throwing bricks at the bus. And he managed to get out of there. And I said, "How did you do it? It sounds astonishing." And he said, "Yeah, I had been through the Vietnam situation, so this was really not so bad. I knew just what to do." Of course, bus drivers not only have to deal with those dramatic situations, but they have to deal with what we all have to deal with sometimes in our daily lives, which is how to deal with difficult people. And as you might imagine, not everyone who gets onto a city bus is ecstatic to be there or ecstatic to be going to their jobs, and very often they take it out on their bus drivers. Deborah Hopkins talked to me about the techniques that she uses to deal with difficult passengers. Many drivers talk to me. She said sometimes someone will get on the bus and their attitude will be very, very ugly. But she just tries to be patient with them, stay professional, bring them around. And she said sometimes the people who have started off being really, really ugly have ended up being very good friends of mine. And the drivers all have different techniques for dealing with this situation. Some of them watch old episodes of Sanford and Sons before they get out onto their routes. Some of them have prayers that they recite. Some of them meditate a little. But everyone grapples with this issue of how do you deal with difficult people and not have it get to you. Now, if there's one person that everyone at the GRTC talks about and admires, it's this man, Eldridge Coles, who you last saw stopping by his passengers' houses. Now, Eldridge Coles has been at the GRTC for 47 years. As he says, he's gone from the back of the bus to the head of the corporation. He's the CEO who spent 7 years as a bus driver and then went on to take every single other position in the GRTC, and now he's the head of it. When he came in as CEO, the very first thing that he did was to give the drivers who had been without a contract for 2 years, he gave them all raises. He restored their uniform allowances. He restored their tool allowances. And only then did he sit down to negotiate with the union. And at that point, he said, we were able to work it out in a week with no lawyers and no mediators. And you know that's very, very unusual. Now, the story that Eldridge Coles told me that stayed with me the most was about how on his days off, he likes to drive out to Willow Lawn, which is where the buses stop because they can't go over the county line. And he sits in the parking lot outside Panera, and he watches the workers get off those buses, and he watches them start their 2 to 3 mile walks to get to their jobs. Sometimes he'll give them a ride, and he'll talk to them about what they're doing. And he said to me, we've got workers who want jobs. They're walking in the hot sun and the freezing cold to get to those jobs. We have employers out in Short Pump who want workers and can't get them. And here are these people who want to work and jobs that need them, and they can't connect because of transportation. And as he said, it breaks my heart. Thank you.